Welcome to The Rainbow Connection. This podcast was designed for mothers who are finding their way through life after loss. Whether you're grieving, trying to conceive again, newly pregnant, or holding hope in your heart for what's to come, this space is for you. Each week you'll hear real and tender stories of love, heartbreak, healing, and the babies who continue to shape us. I'm your host, Kristen Mundy, a mother, doula, and a woman who's walked this path too. May these conversations remind you that you are not alone, that your baby is never forgotten, and that hope and grief can live here together. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to take a moment to tell you a little bit about Reclaim, my trauma-informed online birth course that was created for mothers who are pregnant after loss. This course was designed with your unique needs in mind. The fears, the triggers, the desire to feel safe, seen, and supported as you prepare to birth again. Reclaim is inclusive and honors all the ways of bringing your baby into the world. Whether you're planning a cesarean, a home birth, a hospital birth, or something in between, you deserve to feel safe in your body and to fully understand all your options every step of the way. If you're navigating pregnancy after loss and want a birth course that truly understands, you can learn more at thedoulalife.ca/reclaim. And as a special offer to my podcast listeners, use code RECLAIM to get $100 off. Today on the podcast, I'm sitting down with Lin, a mother of three and a fellow lost mom, to hear the story of her son, Keelan, who was born still at 38 weeks, and the journey of her grief, her love, and the healing path that has followed. Lin opens her heart about the day she discovered her baby was no longer moving, something I know so many of us listening in can relate to. She also shares with us about his birth and the moment she finally held him in her arms and everything clicked. Lin also brings us into her pregnancy after loss with her daughter Logan, the fears and the hope she held side by side throughout her pregnancy. We also discuss the complexities of designing your birth wishes, knowing at the end of the day, of course, an alive baby is all you really want, but also grappling with whether or not you should want other things for your birth as well. Lin honors her son so perfectly in our conversation. It really is a full circle moment that you'll understand a lot more after you listen in. Okay, enough from me. Now let's hear from Lin. Hi, Lin. Welcome to the Rainbow Connection podcast. I'm so thrilled that you agreed to be on today and to share with us.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, of course. I'm so honored to connect today. Lin is going to be sharing two birth stories with us today. She's going to be sharing one about her angel baby, Keelan, and also her rainbow baby's birth story. But before we dive into those, Lin, how about you share with our listeners a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your family?
All right. Thanks, Kristen. And also, I just wanted to say a big thank you to Kristen. I'm sure, like probably many people listening, just her Instagram and her story and her being so open with it has been just, so helpful in navigating like my journey. I didn't think I would find myself, on that side of things, and I did. And just having, your voice was such a comfort, and really did help me with a lot of dark days. So a big thank you to you, Kristen, for that.
Thank you for that.
But I'm Lin. I'm a mom of three. I live in Brooklyn, New York, with my son Bennett, my daughter Logan, and then my husband. His name is Delwyn. He always gets left out to put at the end. But Keelan is my middle baby, my second son, and he's my lost baby, and he's why I'm speaking with Kristen today.
Why don't you share a little bit about Keelan and about your pregnancy and your journey with him?
Yeah, sure. So like I said, Keelan's my second baby, and it was, my oldest was around not quite 2.5 when Keelan was born. And so, I remember my pregnancy with Keelan as just kind of just an easeful thing. I mean, it wasn't my first pregnancy. It wasn't my first baby. And I remember just feeling the sense of ease, the sense of lightness throughout most of his pregnancy. His was probably my like easiest pregnancy physically. Um, and I spent so much of his pregnancy, really still like parenting a baby, like now I like look back at pictures and it like kind of strikes me how young my oldest was at the time, during his pregnancy and as we were even in like the final weeks, still just such a baby. He's 4, almost 4.5 now. So I think a lot of my energy and, like physical, mental, emotional energy was still so dedicated to him as it probably, makes sense for being, 1.5 to 2. It's kind of a crazy time. But I think, that was hard for me. Obviously when we lost Keelan, just feeling like our brain plays tricks on us, but like the story that I was telling myself was like, oh, we didn't focus on Keelan enough. I would have done this differently if we had known this was all the time that we get with him, right? I would have done this differently. But yeah, I mean, my pregnancy with Keelan was just, there was really nothing. Like it was healthy, like normal, easy. And I remember just feeling very like sure of myself, like very like confident in this and that, like, transition time and like confident and kind of preparing for what was next and just feeling like, okay, like, I don't have those first time parent jitters. And I'm like ready for this and we're excited, but we're also not going to go crazy this time. We're not going to like, freak out over sleep schedules and like newborn wake windows. We're just going to go with the flow and it'll be a time where we can just kind of embrace the joy and the like chaos of it all the like more. Um, yeah, so that was Keelan's pregnancy. There was one weekend. This was the weekend we didn't know it at the time, of course, but this was the weekend right before we lost him and he was born. And it was Keelan was born in April 2023, so springtime, and it was one of those like beautiful spring, like one of the first beautiful spring weekends in New York, and we like got together with some friends in Central Park, and like all the kids were running around and being crazy, and I remember, and there's pictures from that weekend of it just like it feeling so full and so, just like that heart bursting type of joy and like that type of love. And um I think back on that weekend a little differently now than I did initially. I think, at the time, right after we lost him, it felt like, oh, this weekend was another example of how my focus was on the wrong baby. My focus was at that time, I thought, my focus was on Bennett. And this was like, our last weekend just savoring time as, or one of our last weekends, savoring time as a family of three and savoring time where we can put all of our energy and attention on him. Soon he'll have to share that. And I thought, for the longest time, really, I thought that was like what that weekend represented was just like, oh, we had no idea what was coming. And this was kind of the last weekend of life as we knew it. And I think it's really only now as I've had more time to process and think about things that I'm, telling myself what I think is probably more of the truth is, that was a gift from him to us. That was a gift from him to us, and that was a gift from us to him. Like that was our weekend as, a family of four, and really like demonstrated and showed how much love that we have for this baby, even though he doesn't get to be, here like with us the same way, the way we wanted.
Like he was a really huge part of that love and that feeling, right? He's like one of the main characters of that weekend.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
That was that weekend, and then Keelan's first day was on a Wednesday, so typical Tuesday, and by the time I was a day short of 38 weeks on that Tuesday. And so it was my last week of working. I had wanted to work kind of all the way until the end to maximize more of my leave for when the baby was born. And just like, busy trying to wrap things up at work. And I'd been feeling a lot of Braxton Hicks types of contractions and was really kind of tuning into that a lot. Um, and so really, I think the whole day had gone by pretty much before I realized, like, oh, I haven't felt this baby move very much today. Uh, and I wasn't doing formal kid counts, which, like, now kind of, 2 years later feels crazy to think about. But I knew that this baby moved all the time, and like, um, by like late afternoon, early evening, when I finally realized, like, oh, I don't think I've felt the baby move very much today. It definitely felt like, different, like not the norm. At the same time, I wasn't panicked. I wasn't panicked. I think it was just like, oh, like it still felt like, okay, let me do all these things. Like, let me finish this. I was in a yoga class. I was in a prenatal yoga class. Like, let me finish this yoga class. Like, get home, help get dinner on the table, like, get everybody fed. We'll get Bennett to sleep. Like, did all the normal bedtime routines. And I remember thinking, like, okay, like, I guess I still haven't felt baby move very much, but once Bennett's asleep, I'll lie down, focus on my movements, like,
Mm.
drink something cold, like, do those things. And so I did, and still wasn't feeling much. And again, that just kind of sense of foreboding is starting to build, but it still wasn't a panicked feeling. And I called my OB line, like, kind of expecting them to say, like, don't worry about it, or just kind of, as like a first step. It wasn't like I was rushing to the hospital, even though, now in hindsight, I know I should have, right? But so I did that, called, and they said the same thing, like, okay, lie down, you can drink something. And if you want, I still remember the phrasing. It was very like, if you want, you can come in. It wasn't like, come in right now. And so I hung out at home for a little bit longer. And at this time, I'm like telling my husband, right, like, oh, we're both sort of like, just there, like realizing, okay, this is the situation. Baby hasn't moved very much. Like, doctors don't seem so concerned. Like, we have no reason to believe anything's really off, but I guess this isn't so normal. And so kind of probably hemmed and hawed for another like half hour at least. And then I was like, okay, I mean, I guess I should just go, right? Like, I should just go is kind of like what the thought process was.
Mhm.
Um, and so my husband stays at home, so someone, has to be home with our toddler. And I hop in an Uber and go to the hospital. That ride there, I remember feeling very off. Just like, I think a lot of lost moms like tell some version of this, just sort of this like weird instinct and like that you have. And I remember distinctly almost like telling myself, it's fine, it's fine. Like, even if he's gone, it's gonna be fine. Like, you still have Bennett, like, it'll be fine. Like, just like kind of this like weird reaction to it.
Rationalizing.
Yeah, like weird. I think everything's like your brain's struggling to catch up, right?
I think in that drive, because I remember that drive,
Mm-hmm.
you're still very much not going there. But if you go there, you can like kind of tiptoe into it and rationalize it because it's really not going to be the case, right? I think your brain is just trying to preview all the possibilities.
Totally.
Yeah, it takes time for us to kind of catch up to what's actually happening, right?
Yeah. Or you're almost like, you know, trying to like, prep yourself. Yeah. So I remember having that weird thought kind of all the way to the hospital. And so I go and check in the triage. Hadn't been there before, except for I had gone to the same hospital that I given birth to Bennett with. So the last time I was there was to give birth to Bennett, but not during my pregnancy with Keelan. Hadn't been to the labor and delivery floor, obviously. And so checking in and just like, I'm by myself and like I'm like still like very like lucid, not like panicked or anything, answering all the like typical intake questions. We get into the triage room right away. I tell them I'm here because of decreased fetal movement. We get into a triage room right away, and they put the fetal monitors on me. And they're because there wasn't a heartbeat right at this point, but they're like figuring it out and trying to get the baby to pick up on the heart monitor. And um, I'm just taking deep breaths because I know now, that the longer this, like that's probably not so normal, right? Like a full term baby, how hard could it be to pick up the heart rate on the um, fetal monitors? And so they're like, okay, well, sometimes like don't worry, like sometimes these things just like act up. Like we're gonna bring in an ultrasound machine. And so they come right back with the ultrasound, and that's when I saw, right? Like I remember looking at the screen and that like grainy black and white photo and almost like thinking like your mind's like tricking you for a second that you see movement, but you don't, that's just moving the wand. And I could see for myself like where his heart is, and I'd had all the other ultrasounds, and I could see that it was still and there was no heart rate. Um and I don't think they were allowed to say anything yet, but they of course knew, and they said we just have to find someone to help us with the machine.
At this point, like what was when they left you in that room after the ultrasound? What were you thinking when they were getting the obstetrician?
Yeah, I mean, it must have only been like a minute. At some point during this process of fiddling with first the fetal monitors and then the bringing in the ultrasound, I pulled up my phone and put my husband on speaker because, I knew at that point, even before they brought in the ultrasound. Really, I think I knew. And I remember, pulling up the speakerphone and just like saying like, it's not good. I think maybe those are the first words I said. Like, it's not good. It's not good. And my husband on the other side, I think, like just saying, "Oh my God," or like, "What do you mean?" I don't know. I think there was probably this moment of confusion. I think he was on speaker though at this point when the attending OB comes in,
Hmm.
and she comes in, and the first things that she says is, "I'm so sorry. It looks like the baby lost the heartbeat." And I think I can hear my husband on the other, on speaker, just like, "Oh my God." And both, I did have that immediate reaction of just like sobbing. And like, I think that was I knew, but her saying that was when, it was real. And I knew for sure. And, um, just like, it's like, oh my God. And like, um, this like big emotional reaction. Like that's, I feel like, when the like floodgates opened. But my husband's still on speaker at this point, right? And I do remember she says like, "Oh, like let me, like I think almost saying to the other nurses and the PA in the room, like let me just double check." And she checks, and of course there's no heart rate. Um, and so she's consoling me. She's giving me a hug, and my husband's on speaker. And so kind of pretty immediately after that, like I take a few deep breaths. I think I say, um, still processing, but I'm like, one of the other things that I said first was like, "Oh my God, like I knew this happened. I just didn't think it was going to happen to me." Like I was like, "I knew this happened. I knew this happened." Um, because I did, I'd heard, I think, like many of us do, stories of stillbirth, and it's just kind of like you shy away from it, like, oh, how horrible, and then um, you go on with your life. And I like have to collect myself pretty quickly because then I immediately jump into problem solving mode. We were at term, we were a day shy of 38 weeks, so had like things in place, like that we had talked plans in place that we had talked about for what happens when I go to the hospital. And so I call my sister who lives in the city as well, to tell her, right, that we lost the baby. But like, I'm calling her because, and she's like obviously crying and distraught, and I was just like, listen, like I need you I need you to do this though. Like, I need you to come to my apartment to be with Bennett. Help my husband pack a bag, so that he can come here. Like, bring my pajamas, bring my, like, all these things. And I'm just sort of like now trying to stay with it, stay in problem solving, like logical mode. And so she does that. Like, it takes them probably within the next, I don't know, hour, an hour and a half. And my husband's able to join me. And during that time, the attending OB, I have a special place in my heart for her. She was with me for a while. I remember her just holding me, and like I noticed on her necklace, I think she had like a mama necklace or like an initial necklace, and I knew I'd never met her before. But I remember she cried with me, and she told me I was a good mom because I was starting to ask her questions like, your mind goes, obviously, like just a million miles a minute. And it's just like all the stuff that I was juggling. Like, do I go home first? Do I go home? Do I like tell my son that his baby died and then come in for an induction? And I knew what happened next. Like, she didn't have to tell me you still have to give birth, right? Like I knew that from like some of the stories that I had read, and I just kind of, I guess, knew that instinctually. I do remember saying to my husband though, like, you don't understand, I still have to give birth to this baby. Um,
Mhm.
and so she was with me for a while and, did everything she could, and I remember at one point she, was walking me through a lot of the decision making, like, okay, so like I would, if you could, maybe if you really wanted to, you could go home. Don't know if I recommend that though, because I wouldn't want you to be alone if labor started. Um, I was like, but like, what do I tell my son? Like, I just wanted to tell him, it's like like he knows, like, you were planning for this. And I was like, yes, but he thinks we're bringing him a baby. And um, so she was really like helpful and good and kind in like helping me, as my mind was racing and talking out loud through all these different things. I remember at one point she said, you're a good mom. Like, as I was sitting there, ruminating about this decision of how I let my oldest son know, she was like, you're a good mom. And that, like, brought a whole new round of tears because it did not feel like I was a very good mom in that moment, right? I was like, maybe I'm a good mom to Bennett, but I wasn't a good mom, and I'm not a good mom to this baby. Um, we talked in that moment about, I think maybe I said it first or her. It's like, should I see him? Like, will he look okay? And I remember her first response was like, I can tell you, like if it would be appropriate to see him. And then hearing her say that, I immediately was like, actually, I don't care. I don't care. I'm seeing him. And she's like, okay, okay. Um, Everyone was as gentle and as kind as they could be, but like, I think the single best thing that she did was she cried with me. And I think that so helped me process things, because it was like, oh, this is how bad it is. Like, it was almost like that. Like, this is how bad it is. Like, everybody knows that this is awful.
Mhm.
And
Especially another mom.
yeah, and especially another mom, but also someone like, and she's not reacting as your medical like team right now or as your doctor. She's reacting as a human. And that really helped. I mean, like, as weird as that sounds. Um, my husband finally gets there. And again, I think both of us are sort of in this kind of just shocked, like, because I remember when I first saw him, neither of us like cried when we first saw each other. It wasn't like this big emotional release. It was just like, okay, we're here, like we have to do this thing. Um, so he's there, and we, wait to get into the labor and delivery room, and pretty quickly start the induction process. And um, I had actually like been planning on doing an unmedicated birth without an epidural this time. I had had a positive experience when I first, but it just felt like something I wanted to do and experience. So, they had counseled like, and I do recommend getting an early epidural. to like make that side of things at least easier. And, I didn't really know what to make of that at that point. I didn't say anything like, oh, actually I don't think I had the presence of mind to like make that decision, knowing that we had lost the baby. So got an early epidural, and all of that was just weirdly so smooth and so straightforward and easy. Um, Both of us, I think, were still in that like just shell shocked like state of mind for a really long time. I remember my husband at one point, like we're waiting there overnight at this point, for the induction process, which both of us knew from our first can be very lengthy. And Dylan had actually asked me at once, like, do you mind if I like finish our taxes? And I was like, yeah, like do it. Like, what else are we gonna do? Like it was just this very like, we're here.
Might be a welcome distraction. Like I remember my husband and we watched Stranger Things, and I was like, this is really weird, but it was like, we have time. What are we going to do with this time? Like,
Right.
you need to almost take a bit of a reprieve, right?
Totally. Or like save your like brain and your emotional energy for like what you feel like is coming next. And yeah, definitely. It was like part distraction, part feeling like, well, I don't know. I have no idea what we're supposed to be doing, but like maybe we do something vaguely productive and like completely unrelated. I don't know. Like, and so I was trying to sleep. Obviously, neither of us could really sleep, but the entire induction process was smooth. I'd like gotten an epidural fairly early, pretty much like right before Pitocin started, so I really didn't feel any contraction pain. And yeah, I remember like I was definitely, and still am, like someone who was like very interested in the birth process and was like really excited about all of that, like, and so I remember actually like still took little notes on my phone of like, okay, it's like what, when did Pitocin start? Like when did like they come and break my water? How far along was I there? Like still being very like interested and like involved in like how this birth was going, which was felt kind of odd, I think, at the time, but makes a lot of sense, I think, now. Um, and then kind of before we knew it, like, the sun had come up and it was the next morning, and um, there was a shift change, and the new attending provider on call was the midwife with the practice that I was seeing. And I'd seen her once during one of my prenatal appointments with Keelan. And so she was a familiar face, and that, like, that small thing felt like a really big comfort too, honestly. And she comes in and she was just also just like such a warm and like nurturing personality that felt really comforting. She comes in and, again, like gives me a big hug, and, we cry together for a bit, and she, just says how sorry she is. At some point, like pretty soon after that, I started feeling pressure, and so they came and checked me, and sure enough, I was complete. It was at that point that Delwyn, I think that's what I remember is the first time that he had this like emotional response. We're like, okay, like we're gonna start, getting ready to push. And I remember him just looking over the hospital bed at me, and he just, starts to cry, and he's like, I just know that this is gonna be hard for you. I mean, he was there obviously with the birth of our first son, and as a first time mom, that pushing stage is longer, right? And like he saw how hard I worked to push Bennett out, and in his mind, it's going to be the same, but then our baby's not here anymore. Our baby's dead, and I think that's when it became real to him that like what we were about to do, what I was about to do, and I think he felt just so helpless and sad for me, for him, but mostly for me in that moment. Um, so we collected ourselves and got ready to push, and I kind of like, okay, let's do one life practice push. And then my midwife, and she was such like a gentle nature to her. She was like, okay, actually on the next push, you're going to deliver. So two pushes, just like a world different than the almost 2 hours I pushed with her first. And sure enough, on the next push, she was out. And I remember asking, like, is he out? Is he out? And they kind of were like, yeah, yeah, like he's out. And then I said, does he look okay? And again, they said yes. And it's like, can I see him? And so the midwife holds up our baby, holds up Keelan. And that's the moment, that's the moment that's cemented in my brain as like, everything before and then everything after. Because, and I think Dylan and I, my husband and I, saw at the same time, he looked exactly like Bennett, that moment, just that like instant, it felt like it was just like whoosh, everything became real like that in that one instant. I saw his face and I saw that he looked like us. He looked, exactly like us, and he looked exactly like his brother. He was of us. He, belongs to us. And it was so clear he wasn't alive. He didn't look alive. He wasn't crying. He wasn't pink. I think that's just when like both those realities hit me, that he was our son, he's our son, and he's gone. It was just like all those truths just came, you know, to the forefront. And I think that moment, like it just in that moment, it became clear, like life is never going to be the same again. Like you are never going to just, if you had any like, sort of like Hail Mary hopes of like just getting over this before when like doing your taxes and like, kind of moving on, it was like, no, and so, like, both Delton and I think probably like had the same thought process, like, and the same like reaction. And I think our, care team saw that and like kind of like gently sort of whisked away. We talked about some of this, to swaddle him, put, like a little onesie and swaddle him. And, so I think they went and they did that, and we took a moment. And they came back and they had him and, the bassinet. And, I think that we spent a few more hours in the room after that and did a lot of like the paperwork and like stuff that goes along with birth and then goes along with having a stillbirth. And that part is still, all um so crazy to think back on, like, the decisions that you're faced with and are trying to make, in real time after going through this, completely unexpected loss. Um, and we each held him for really just a few moments, and I think both had this sort of like desperate urge to go back home and go back to Bennett. We didn't really ask like how long we could stay. We didn't really ask about, cooling bassinets. Like we didn't really like ask all those questions that I now, know we probably could have. We did ask to be discharged early, and, started kind of like mentally preparing for that. Just like, okay, like, we spend some time with him, but we also we need to go home. Like we need to get out of here. We need to go home. Like, I remember thinking like I can't do anything more for this baby. Like, but I have to go home to my other son, and because he needs me. And so that, felt obviously hard, but I think was also something that drove us forward.
So what was that like coming home to your 2-year-old? What did that look like? What did that conversation look like for you guys?
And we had talked about it with like the child life specialist briefly in the hospital. And she had said like, do you have any kind of thoughts about how to go about this conversation? I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Like, I think we'll just say like, baby Dee was his, like in utero little nickname. Dee means little brother. And I was like, I guess we just say baby Dee died. And like mama and dada are really sad about it because that means he doesn't get to come home. Baby Dee died. And she was like, yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly it. You just want to, she had advised us, like, you just want to try to keep your language as simple and straightforward as possible. And I wouldn't say like, oh, baby was sick or baby was, late or went to sleep or like, use any euphemisms because kids can be very literal at that age. So I appreciated that. um, guidance, because we were sort of at a loss, and we're of course like very focused on how to try to shield him from some of this, how to even do that part. Um, and kids like in kid very like kid fashion kind of took it in stride, honestly. Like he was just we came home, and when we first saw him, we were like, we have to tell you something, Bennett, like baby Dee Dee died, and like, did that. And he didn't really have any big reactions at the time. And he was very distracted too. He loved his grandparents, and my parents were here at this point. And a day or two later, my husband's mom came into town too, and he was just very distracted by like all the extra family here. Like in his mind, he saw, and we didn't, necessarily hide it from him how sad we were, but he was also just like, I think, really trying to like process that. It's like it felt kind of fun to him, and I think that we also leaned into that too. Like we needed him, we needed his like levity and his like kid energy to like take us out of wanting to do nothing except lie in bed and cry all day too. um and so he really was a blessing in that way, just having this child, this very, needy 2-year-old, to like still give us purpose. Like I dropped him off at school the next day, and because I needed to do that for myself, that, I could still do that as his mom and hold myself together for that. And that's kind of how we spent, few like those early weeks and months, was just like really focused on trying to keep this baby's routine together and help him feel as safe as possible, even though he, knew that something had changed and was wrong. He did do a lot in the early months of asking, where baby Dee Dee go? Where baby Dee Dee go? And I would just say, I don't know, Bennett. Like, he died and I don't know, and I think I had to get comfortable with that.
While we take a quick break, I wanted to introduce you to The Haven, my signature 12-week support program for mothers who are pregnant again after miscarriage, stillbirth, or infant loss. The Haven isn't just a course. It's a trauma-informed, community-centered program that includes weekly live workshops, expert guest speakers, and ongoing doula support from me, your dedicated pregnancy after loss doula, anytime you need it. You'll also receive guided journaling prompts, full access to my 13-module pregnancy after loss birth course, Reclaim, and a warm, intimate community of other PAL mothers, a place where you can be real, be held, and be reminded that you are not alone in this. Enrollment is now open at thedoulalife.ca/the/haven, with our next fall cohort reopening this September. You do not have to go through your pregnancy after loss alone, and inside the Haven, you won't. As a special offer to my podcast listeners, use code RAINBOW to get $100 off enrollment. I'm sure that conversation has evolved over time with him getting older as well, right? It is such a different experience, I find, when you, at least from, I don't have any personal experience with it, but just from my clients, like, and you do have a baby at home and you lose your second child, how, you can't really lay on the couch all day and cry. You have to get up and get this baby up and have them go through their routine, and you still have to show up as a parent. And I can only imagine how complex that is, where it's probably sometimes it's nice because it keeps you going, but other times it's probably a lot, that you can't really afford to fall apart as much as, you would have otherwise.
Yeah, very complex, but gave me a lot of purpose, like I think it's not necessarily fair to put that on a 2-year-old, but he really was a saving grace, right? Just like having this baby who needs you and is counting on you. And not only did I have no choice really, but it really like was something that I think I was able to say that I was proud of, in those days where it felt like I was a big failure at this thing that I was supposed to be able to do, but I was still being a decent mom to my other son. I think that was a really that was big for me.
You're a great mom. It's
Thank
true.
you.
What did how were you guys feeling, I want to say like when the dust has settled, but does it ever really settle? Not really, right? So were you guys feeling, I know a lot of us come into this feeling differently, or some of us are, eager to want to have another baby right away. And some are like, I need a moment to catch my breath. I'm not sure if I can do this again. How were you guys feeling, and how did that path look towards, getting pregnant again?
I mean, I think for both of us, it was very like immediate that we were both sure we wanted to try again and as soon as possible. I mean, I think that, um, I mean, you've probably come across it, but this like whole cliche about like I think when you expect a second child, you're like, everyone sort of doubts, like, oh, will I be able to love another baby the same way I love my first? And even though we had lost Keelan, that part felt really much so like the same. It felt like, no, he showed us that we are capable of this. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we loved him and love him deeply, even though he's not here with us. And like, it was almost like, despite his death, that we still had that like realization of what it means to open up our hearts to another baby.
Grows, right? It just
Your heart, right? Like the thing about like, oh, you grow a whole new heart for for every baby. um that felt like it rang true, and it really, I think so we fell into that camp of like, no, this is like, we desperately want this, and we want this, as soon as we can. And I do think there was a big element for me of like feeling like I was playing catch up. And, of course, I'd just gone through like a full term pregnancy and was preparing to bring home a baby. And so there's that aspect that it also was like, everywhere we turned in our neighborhood and in our little community, someone was bringing home a new baby because he was, at that age. Like a lot of people have their kids, right? Like 2.5 years apart. And so it felt like, yeah, for a long time, it felt like we were just like, oh my God, like we're behind, we're playing catch up, like we need to do this, like for not just for us, but for Bennett. And like, um, that part, what probably wasn't the healthiest, but like that is sort of like was our mindset, of wanting to do this right away. I actually don't think that I really gave myself much time to really think through, the depths of the experience that I was trying to sign up for. Which brings me to my pregnancy with Logan. Like it was just felt like, okay, I want to, do this right away and do this as soon as possible. And so during that pregnancy with her, it felt like the overwhelming feeling during those 9 months was like, why do you feel so weird? Like, why do you feel so bad? This is exactly what you wanted. No, like, this is exactly what you wanted. Um, but, and I know I don't have to tell you this, but like, it really is just such a wild experience because, yes, it's exactly what you wanted, but it's also exactly, your biggest fear. That pregnancy after loss experience really is just, can be brutal. I found a lot of help in just like, I felt like I didn't belong in many ways in like the mom community anymore. Like wasn't able to participate really, with anywhere near that same sort of levity that I had before. Like at some point I became very clearly pregnant, and it was very hard to like make small talk about that when it wouldn't have felt like any, like it would have been exactly what I wanted before. And so that part felt, just hard on top of an already hard thing. Just like this loss of a, sense of community and camaraderie with, we live in a neighborhood with a lot of young parents, and that felt hard to when it felt like the thing that I had found so much like, just belonging in before, all of a sudden became like a very scary, place to navigate.
Mhm.
So I found a lot of support in finding people who like were going through the same thing and like could speak the same language, and found that through like different support groups and like other, programs that were set up specifically for pregnancy after loss.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think going into prepping for Logan's birth, it took me a while to think about like what my preferences still were, because this again wasn't my first rodeo. It wasn't my first living child either, but it took a while to realize like, are you still allowed to have preferences? Like, are you still allowed to have like thoughts about how you want this birth to go beyond just bringing home a living baby? I didn't know, like it took a while to be like, is that selfish to think about like, are there anything else?
Yeah, and I find that there was like two camps after you lose your baby, and it's either like the crunchy birth world camp or
Right.
the lost mom community. And like, what if I fall somewhere in the middle, right? Like,
Exactly.
I know that there's so many that just preach to like having a live baby, and it's like, yeah, well, I wanted that last time too. Of course, I want a live baby. That's just a given. But like, am I still allowed to care about all these other things? Because that's important to me too, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. You're exactly right. It was like a um total double-edged sword too, like getting all of a sudden like surrounding myself with other stories of like other lost moms, because then it was a whole new set of experiences that weren't part of my story but now were salient to me. And so at one point it was like, should you even want a vaginal birth? Like, should you just like schedule a C-section? Because, intrapartum stillbirths happen. And so I think it was just a lot of like your mind just reeling and struggling to make decisions. um, Third trimester was really hard for me when you're able to feel movements and when baby's, viable and it starts to become that dance between like out or in type of a thing. It felt like all of that pressure was on me, and I felt really good about my care team had started seeing an MFM. Actually, the first rainbow clinic set up in the U.S. is based in New York at Mount Sinai Hospital, and I got my MFM care through them and still went and saw my OB practice that I had gone to with Keelan's pregnancy. And so I felt really good about them, but it still felt like no one lives in my body. No one lives in my body. Not even my husband lives in my body, even though he lost our son too. And no one else can feel exactly what I'm feeling except me. And it's all up to me to make sure that if I missed something last time, and maybe I did, like I don't remember the last time I felt Keelan move, and I don't remember if there was like a long length of time, if he slowed down, like I just don't remember because that's not where my mind was. But if there was a time to intervene last time, I missed it and I can't miss it again, and I think that was a really hard place to live for, those long months.
Mhm.
And so, coming to Logan's induction day, and there was drama like there always is with babies. I feel like they always have. Birth is always just like, unexpected, even if you feel like you're have pinpointed a day or for an induction or whatever. Um, I'd been getting ultrasounds like twice a week or more, like in those like pretty much for my entire third trimester. And all of a sudden, on my last OB appointment, she was breech, like she was head down or head up, and came in there like fully prepared to like talk through final logistics with my OB and ask for like me like a cervical check, like 'cause I was harboring kind of the secret hope of getting going to labor on my own, even though I was scheduled for an induction early. Um, and she was breech, and I was just like, oh my goodness, like all of a sudden, like all this planning, all this stuff goes out the window. What are we gonna do? My OB scrambled to book an ECV, which is external cephalic version, where they try to turn the baby manually, like for that Friday, for like 2 days later. She's like scrambling. I was like putting my pants back on as she's like telling me like, okay, I got it booked. It was just this like whole like flurry of activity. And then I came home that night and I was just like beside myself, because it was like I'd finally spent all this time like agonizing over when to schedule an early induction, right? And then like planning, I'd done all this work to realize like, okay, no, I think I still do want to try this unmedicated, even though it's going to be an induction. And now I was faced with the very real possibility of having to do a C-section, and that's just not what I wanted. And so I had a talk with her. I remember saying to her, like, listen, like, if you know something I don't know and this is really the way that you need to come out, like, I will trust that. But, like, I really think, Mama really thinks that this is, a better way to do things. So if you can do it, like, let's head back down. Um, and like they like didn't sleep that night and had my very last MFM appointment the next morning. And the first thing that we had the ultrasound tech do was like, the second she put the wand on my belly, I was like, oh my God, that's a head. Like, thank God. And so we had decided, we were like, okay, like if she's head down, like no more time for shenanigans. Our induction wasn't scheduled until that following Monday, but we had kind of, Dylan and I had talked about it, like, okay, like no shenanigans. If she flips one time, she could flip again, right? Like, let's just go. Well, today is the day.
She really, really kept you on your toes.
And that is her personality even now. She's just like, what she says goes. Yeah, so we get into the room, and so again, it's not my OB, even though like we had a scheduled induction with her, but it was really lovely. The the attending OB who was on call then, and prepare for an induction. It's funny because again, all this like flurry of activity. My husband wasn't with me when I first go into the room. He went home to like go get our bags, say like hi to our son who came home from school, to like get all those logistics in order, and also like tell him, prep him like that we were going to the hospital to have this baby. Throughout all of Logan's pregnancy, of course, like it was a lot. We were again really like focused on how Bennett was going to take things. I think it was like a big piece of why I agonized over like different decisions, like when to tell him, when to tell anyone, like when to schedule this induction, balancing the possibility of NICU time, like the increased risk of NICU time versus just wanting to get this baby out as soon as possible and here and safe. Because I knew that, it wasn't just us who was going through this. Like, I didn't want him to think that babies were supposed to die. Like I wanted him to be able to do this in like a way that felt safe and calm for our son. And I wanted to shield him from a lot of the anxieties that we were feeling, even though I know that he probably, felt some of that. I just didn't want him to feel worried that this baby was going to die again. I think a lot of where we spent our energy was trying to make sure Bennett was okay and doing the things that we could. So I'm glad that my husband was there to, be the person to like explain to him where we were going and why and prep him for that. But it also meant that Pitocin had started by the time he finally like came to the hospital, and I was like, was prepping to do this unmedicated, had like thought about a doula, didn't find one that I think I really wanted a doula who had gone through a stillbirth, and like didn't really find one. So it was just going to be me and my husband. And so I remember, like being in the room being like, Pitocin is starting, like, where are you? But ended up being fine. He came up to the room with the stuff. And then it was kind of like a lot of like hullabaloo for nothing. Like it felt like it was the first 6 hours of that induction. I really felt very much of nothing, like felt pretty much nothing. And they came and broke my water. I was like only like 3 centimeters, was feeling pretty much nothing. I think we had watched a movie, and then like after they broke my water, like started feeling some more contractions and like more intense, but finished the movie. And then after that, like labored, for a couple hours. And I tried to prep my husband on some like comfort measures, like knowing that he was going to be my main support person during this, like hopefully. Unmedicated labor, but and he was like, we'd tried different like hip squeezes, and then of course we get into it, and he's like, I'm like, not for me, like we're not doing this. And so it very much was kind of like in my own little like bubble for a while, had a birth ball, was bleeding over that, and like did that for a little while. At one point, like moved over to the bed because it just felt like I wanted to like be able to lie down and not hold myself up. the team comes in and is like, do you think you might be close? So, like, do you think you might be there? I was like, what do you mean there? It's like, well, it just looks like from the like monitor, like that you might be close. And I was like, I would love to be close. Like at this point, I was like very much so working hard through contractions. I was like, I would love to be close. And he's like, okay, well, do you want us to check you? I was like, sure. And so they check me, and it's kind of like 5 centimeters. And that moment, and I prepped my husband, I said, like, at some point, I'm going to feel like I can't do this anymore. And it is your job at that point to say, you can do this. You're so close. You can do this. That means you're close. And not, okay, don't worry about it. We can just get the epidural, and I prepped him. And still he was like, you could tell he was like, oh my God, like, because it's going to take so much longer. What have we gotten ourselves into? I'm obviously feeling that way too. And I am working hard through contractions, but in between I can still kind of like, pick up what's happening in the room. And I hear our nurse, who is lovely, just saying to my husband, like, oh, sometimes that like pickup from 4 to 5 centimeters can be really hard, like that, move into active labor can be really hard. You can do this, you can just kind of like stroke her arm, and like, and he's like, okay. And then and then it gets easier. And you can see her be like, no, and I know it doesn't get easier, right? Like I'm just like, not really able to like have a conversation back, but just like in my brain being like, no, it doesn't get easier. Like, why would you ask that? And so then, of course, like, very like lovingly he comes over and he's trying to like, gently stroke my arm. And it was like, I told him later, it was like, that's like, you come to like a 5-alarm fire with like a little squirt bottle. Like that wasn't doing anything. But at that point, I had this moment of like, oh my gosh, like we're stuck here because there's no way I can hold still for an epidural either. Like I know that. And so the team's in the room still, they're like charting. And then I feel this like distinct sensation, like it wasn't pressure, but just literally this distinct sensation of like the baby's head descending, just like, and I was like, I think I'm pushing, and they're still in the room. Like this was only a few minutes later. And she's like, do you want me to check again? And I was like, okay, yeah, sure. And so the PA checks again, and she's like, yep, you're complete. And the nurse was like, what? That was like no more than 10 minutes. And I remember being like, yes, like said that out loud, just like, yes, and it was funny. I obviously like going into Logan's birth, I had a lot of like, anxiety over like, this is it. This is the finish line. Like I was like excited for that, but like had a lot of anxiety, of course, over how it was going to go. Like, it came to it, of course, from like a completely different place than I had approached my birth with Bennett or Keelan, even, because we weren't prepping for this. And I do think that I had anticipated feeling a lot more like anxiety, just feeling more emotional during that birth. And I think, even though it wasn't necessarily a conscious decision at the time, but the decision to go without an epidural gave me no choice but to like stay there and be present in that moment where I was really just trying to work hard through like the physical sensations and breathe through them and like tackle each one was all I could focus on. I really wasn't thinking about like, oh my goodness, like, is the baby okay? And I thought I would. So that was unexpected, but, kind of like a pleasant surprise.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're getting ready to push, and I had told my husband, I'd written down some like affirmations for myself, and I had told him, bring these out and like read them to me, make me repeat them back, like when shit hits the fan, basically. And so I think he finally remembers as we're getting ready to push, and that helped a little bit, and yeah, and Logan came out in just a couple pushes again. It was like the most intense sensation. But at one point, actually, I remember the OB on call, like, she like made eye contact with me in kind of like the chaos, like not chaos, but, like in that sort of just like a bunch of people in the room and like, and she's like, don't be scared. Like, don't be scared. And I don't think that that's like what I would have anticipated feeling comforting, like, before this, but I remember like being able to kind of like lock eyes with her, just like, okay, like, okay. Um, and she came out on the next push. And, I think I was still coming down from that adrenaline high in a way because I didn't anticipate, I anticipated that moment being just this like huge release of emotion for me after everything that we've been through with losing Keelan. And it really wasn't yet, like it was still kind of like, oh my gosh, like, okay, like sort of that like type of reaction. She came out, she was good, like everything was good. She was crying, she was pink. And, I remember they were saying that, like, okay, like, look, she's pink, because I think they were worried that I was going to be worried. Um, and she had a little bit of a short cord, so they actually like couldn't bring her up onto my chest immediately. But then I think after the cord was cut, my husband was like, "Do you want to hear the rest of your affirmations? Because we didn't make it through." He was like, "There's two left. Do you want to hear the rest of them?" I was like, "Yes." And it was actually the two that directly called in Keelan, and it was, Keelan is close by. This is the closest our worlds collide in this life. I will embrace it. So I said that. And then I said, I'm about to meet my baby, and she carries a piece of Keelan. And I said those out loud, and just, and that was the moment. That was like the emotion of both Dylan and I, start crying, and everyone in the room just, had tears in their eyes. And my OB, like, so, like, such a funny personality, came and like gave me a kiss on the head and gave like the baby a kiss on the head. And like, the nurse was like, no, I'm crying. Like, it was just like, that was, that was that like first moment. I was like, we made it. We did this. She's here.
The exhale.
Yeah, the exhale.
Yeah, so beautiful. Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Like, what was that moment like? Finally making it to that, proverbial finish line where you meet your rainbow. I think a lot of the time we expect that we're going to have like this huge emotional response right away, just be so thrilled to meet our baby. And like sometimes that does happen, but sometimes it takes our body a minute to just be like, I need to catch up to like what's going on, especially when we don't have an epidural, because your body is going through the most intense, physical feat of its life. And you're also getting the biggest rush of oxytocin like you will ever get. And sometimes it just takes us a minute to process, but I suspect that you needed to hear those affirmations as well.
Yeah. I'm glad that I wrote them for myself, and they really did help. And it was kind of perfect, the way it ended up shaking out. I mean, I think that if I wasn't admitting, even though I didn't really feel like I wanted to admit it beforehand, I do think I was looking for a big, sense of redemption in a way, with Logan's birth. And I do think that, it wasn't perfect, and like not everything went according to plan, but like
it never does.
It never does. Yeah.
To be right.
But it was a beautiful experience, and it was what we needed. And we had our beautiful baby girl. It was, so surreal. Still is very surreal. And yeah, just very grateful.
I love that. Do you care if I ask you some questions?
Yeah, please.
How does honoring Keelan show up in your life now, especially now that, you've welcomed Logan into your life and Bennett's a little bit older? What does that look like for your family?
I mean, I think there's a lot of little quiet ways that we bring him into our life and our family. And, this was something that I actually struggled with a lot in those early, I mean, still, but like, especially in those early months, it felt like, and social media can be, such a double-edged sword too, but like, that's what I did, right? Like so many of us do, like look to find stories that are similar to ours. And it felt like everybody had like, founded an organization and was doing all these things, like amazing things in their babies' names. And I wasn't yet. And that felt like, oh my gosh, like we're not doing a good enough job. But I've learned, that for us, and it's just been about, like the everyday things, the quiet things. We have his picture in our house, and we talk about him with our kids. And like somewhat recently, we have these little pictures of like everybody's birth in the house, like these little like it's a little gallery wall basically, and it's got everybody on there. It's got Bennett, it's got Keelan, it's got Logan. And the other day, Bennett was in our room and like looking at those pictures, and I was like, "Do you want to hear the story of how you were born?" And he was like, "Yes." And then he was like, "I want to hear the story of how Keelan was born." And I was like, "Okay, like we can tell that story. We can tell that story, and it doesn't have to be this dark thing. It can just be a normal thing for you." And we've gone through 2 birthdays now, marking Keelan's birthday, and we, are able to involve our kids, and I'll bake him a cake and we'll sing happy birthday, and like that's enough, like that's like it's never enough because I want him to be here, but like that little thing is somehow enough too. And so I think I'm learning and have learned that it's like doesn't have to be loud, and it can be every day. And he's always, a part of our lives and our family, and he's still like, never far from my mind. I tell Logan now, every day when I put her down, I tell her, thank you for coming to us and thank you for bringing a piece of your brother Keelan. Yeah, and I think, that I always hold close to my heart, being able to, squeeze this living child and like tell her, about her brother who came before her. But, in kind of a bigger sense, like a more, I don't know, external sense, I recently started working as a doula myself, and focusing on pregnancy after loss and bereavement care. And I did that. It took a lot of soul searching to kind of come to that like decision, but being able to do that work to help others who are walking this journey that they never thought they'd find themselves on has been so, I mean, like hard to put into words, like, but such a rewarding and incredible experience. I mean, I think that it's what I was looking for. It's what I was looking for during my pregnancy with Logan, and in the hospital with Keelan too. Just someone who's gone through this before. Like I feel like there is something so powerful about that like bond of lived experience of this like living this thing that is everyone else's worst nightmare. But like I think it's really what I was looking for, someone to say, I've been through this. This is how I survived, and you will too. I think that would have meant the world to me. And it, that's my hope, to be able to give that to others. But it's also been such a healing thing for me too. And it's how I carry my son, Blake, into, how I carry his legacy into our lives, and how I continue to parent him, even though it's not the way that I wanted. And so that's been just like the most incredible experience so far.
I love that. I find that children are, just going back to your comment about, telling Bennett Keelan's birth story, I find that children are so healing just in the fact that that's all it is to him. It's how his brother was born. And he can ask you that question and not shy away from it. And it could just be like a normalized thing and a space for you to be able to share it in a way where, people aren't looking at you differently and treating you differently. It's just, that's how my brother was born.
Mm-hmm.
I love how you said, that quiet everyday honoring, because I think that is such an important thing. I like the quote that came to mind was like, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family. And that's what came to mind for me, is like, you really are, now that you've become a doula and you're helping other people, but even just you showing up as a parent and, as an amazing parent to Bennett and to Logan, and carrying on Keelan's legacy through that, I think that is, the perfect way to honor your baby.
Yeah.
I love it.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think I do want to just like hone in on that, because I remember, listening to podcasts when Keelan first died and being like, oh my gosh, everyone's done all these things. Like, their baby's names are on all these places. Like, all this like money raised for this organization or this charity started. And it's like, I have to do all that. I have to do all of that. Otherwise I'm not, doing enough for my son. And it really is just, he's in everything that I do. He's in everything good that I do. And like the doula practice is the newer thing that like feels very, like tangible and is there, but like he's always in everything that I do. And that is enough. And if I could go back in time and tell myself that, that is what I would say. Like, every day you live is in tribute to your son, and he's in all the good that you do.
I love that. I think that's a perfect way to end things.
Yeah.
Well, Lynn, thank you so much
Thank you,
for
Kristen.
being here today and letting us see you and witness you and hearing about your beautiful babies. I know that all of us come into this and all of us have different stories, but I know that a lot of us will find similarities and, comfort and validation in everything that you shared today. And I'm just so thankful that you've shared that part of your heart with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristen. It always feels so good, just so nurturing to like have this space where you can speak with, just openness, and know that the other people, both listening, but also you, like, are safe people to share, with, and to show up as kind of authentically. And so thank you so much. This has been such a treat, and I so appreciate it.
Lynn, I just want to take a moment to thank you for your courage and to thank you for sharing your beautiful Keelan with us. Thank you for also reminding us that love does not end where life does. I know your words will stay with so many parents listening in who are navigating the same heartbreak and searching for that hope. And thank you also for spreading that hope. I know how difficult it can be to cultivate in a pregnancy after loss, but hearing your story with Keelan and Logan makes it feel that much more possible. Now, if today's conversation touched your heart, I'd ask that you please consider sharing this episode with someone who might need to hear it. Until next time, take care of your heart. Your baby is never forgotten, and neither are you. If you enjoyed today's episode and you are looking to feel a little less alone in life after loss, don't forget to hit subscribe so you can continue hearing real, honest stories from mothers who've walked this path too, and to stay up to date with all future episodes of The Rainbow Connection. If you're looking to connect more, Instagram is where I hang out most, so come and join me in a beautiful community of lost moms for PAL-specific birth education, real-life grief talk, and deep solidarity. You can find me at the.doula.life. And don't forget to check out today's show notes for any resources mentioned in this episode, or head to thedoulalife.ca/podcast for more. And remember, you are never alone. I'll see you in the next episode.